Just do it. It'll turn out okay. And today, I am with someone who does it a lot. For those who may not know who you are, like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I am the Godless Engineer. Anybody that's interested in whatever I'm saying, y'all can find me over at YouTube, Godless Engineer. So I talk about a lot of different stuff, like intelligent design, but also atheism, religion in general, history, politics. Like I run a pretty wide variety kind of topic in the niche of I guess atheist topics.
Awesome. Well, a few weeks ago, this point, months ago, I was, I do a lot of debunking creationist claim videos. Your channel, for example, and
Mm.
and then I was and and the ID people always say, well, it wasn't a common ancestor. It was they're so similar because it's a common designer, an intelligent designer. Which got me thinking: if it was just intelligent design, why does most stuff suck?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I mean, you would think that a perfect designer would design or make things perfectly, and not with flaws or anything like that. But a general comeback for that is just that when Eve and Adam ate the fruit from the tree of knowledge, they caused some kind of change that made us imperfect. So we were perfect before, and we didn't have these problems, but now it's imperfect because a woman ate a fruit salad. And that's typically um the line that's given by ID proponents. And I mean that's incredibly unlikely, because that would take a fundamental change in not only how our bodies work, but in like physics and chemistry, and several different laws of nature would have to fundamentally change from what they were to what they are now. That it makes it incredibly unlikely. Also, I mean, there's no evidence for it other than they have a book that says that, not that the fundamental laws of nature changed, but
Oh,
just that a woman ate a
oh,
fruit
oh,
and
and
now.
don't forget, and it was good, which means it can't be bad.
Right, exactly.
Uh, so, yeah, I know one a lot of people talk about. Before we get to that, also another thing they say it's so I've heard this before that our body is so complex it had to be designed. As an engineer, do you design something? When you build something, are you trying to make it as complex as possible when you make something?
No, I mean, well, as a software engineer, we're trying to not make things as complex as possible, because the more complex it is, the more likely there are there are spots that where errors can occur. And so what you want to do is try to reduce the complexity of like your product or your design, so that you reduce the amount of possible places where flaws or errors can be introduced. At least that's one mitigation tactic for it. Sometimes complexity can't be mitigated all that well, but I would think that if you're the smartest entity in reality, you should be able to figure out at least a better way to design things than things seem to have come together.
Yeah. So yeah, I know there's a lot. A lot of things people talk about is that what's the I forget what it's called, but it's that nerve thing around the heart and stuff back to the brain. I forget what the
Oh yeah,
I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about. There's a I don't know if it's a nerve. Are you talking about the blood vessel that like
Yeah,
giraffes, it only needs to go like a few centimeters, but because of where the blood vessel was prior to them evolving longer necks, it goes down and around and all the way back up. And so like that's a very imprecise design if it was designed, but as a natural evolution, I mean, it kind of makes sense that it would end up developing that way as far as we understand the evolution of like giraffes and stuff.
Yeah, someone brought this up one time. Is as bad as giraffes have it,
Mhm.
sauropods have it much worse.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Hey there. Yep, we got you.
Yes. Yeah, we were talking.
Going. Launch away there, Lamont.
Yeah, you might want to try about the camera.
Okay.
Oh, there! I heard you that fine that
Oh.
time. Yeah, we were talking about how how giraffes and sauropods have that fun little neck nerve going around, and
Yeah, the
and
laryngeal,
how
that's a classic example of why would anyone design this, but it makes sense from an evolutionary point of view because deep where dinosaurs and giraffes all had a common ancestor, they were just fish. And the distance where that little vessel was just next to something, but it happened to curl around a particular bone area. So as the neck changed and the structure, all that thing that just carried along with it. Minor, we're redoing the stereo system and trying to connect. Am I losing? Are you losing me? I'm getting a reload bit. I don't know. If you do your stereo system, you could just unplug the HDMI cable and untangle the cord and plug it in to the thing fresh. That's what a designer can do. But evolution can't do that. It's got to take the stuff that exists and it modifies and modifies. At no point is a little light bulb going off in natural selection. Well, that's stupid. I could do it this way. Now, as it turns out, some of that nerve action having a structure, something else can attach to it. It's intelligent. So, see, it's purposeful after all. Not really.
Yeah, we talked about too before you got here about how they say how it's so complex it must be designed. Like no, if it was designed, it'd be less complex. It'd be like simpler.
Well, that's a possibility. Although, but theoretically, you can have very complex systems. It's not the simplest device to move stuff around. Stirling engines are much simpler, but actually, the oil and still work. That kind of stuff can happen all the time. One of my delicious examples that I think Jackson and I pointed out in the rocks were there, I may even have put it into Evolution Slam Dunk, is the fact that we now know that all toothless mammals have tooth enamel genes buried in their genes. What would the designer do that? That's for a gas tank on a Tesla.
So Jack, what do you have to do you fight like against this argument, design argument a lot in your videos?
Oh, which design argument? Just a
Any design
oh.
in general.
Well, I mean, I get just general appeals like, oh, like they gesture broadly at the room. Like, do you think all of this just sort of came together coincidentally? And so it's just, it just ends up being kind of a lazy thought process because it's like, well, I can't think of how this could come into, couldn't be. I can't think of how this could have come about naturally. So therefore, it must have been God that did it, and people don't seem to, at least the apologists and people that get in comment sections, they don't seem to think any deeper about it, because I feel like it's kind of one of those situations where if you just think about how some of these natural things are quote unquote designed, I think that you could see like the flaws in it, and then you would need to ask the question of like, why did a perfect being create flawed designs? And that's, you could follow that
My
rabbit hole
experience
through
is
the
very similar.
apologetic well if you wanted to.
The design argument that I tend to get is exactly that. All of the chemical together, parts, and the lungs, elbows, eyeballs, everything has to be all together. But when you look at the actual, see how things can develop and how things were rudimentary in the past, the way you look at that evidence. So I run with showing up at they're operating at a much more superficial level from that. I think another area that bears on how inept design is that it's useless. If you look at the intelligent design movement, who are marinated in it, that are marinated in it, and see, well, can they apply it to anything? Can they predict anything? Can they say anything? No. And ask an anti-evolutionist anything really, and intelligent designer, they light bulb off moment at that. The create.
Yeah.
Did we lose
Yeah.
RJ?
Probably.
Oh. Oh, there he is.
Okay.
My Wi-Fi connection.
Yeah, apparently you can only do stuff at 2 a.m, your time.
Not on. That's when I can do it.
So, you mentioned that all this stuff has to be in place totally before anything can happen. Also, like it couldn't happen in state like Billy, like it had to be from the start, like
yeah, exactly.
Like the wing argument or the eye argument, or
organisms that had lungs didn't pop out of the middle of nowhere. That lungs developed as a feature for certain groups of gilled fish, and we still have gilled fish today that have the feature telling us. Now that same element that's common, which is the idea that you can grab oxygen from like a little bit of air and process it in the lungs, eventually it reaches where you have amphibians stage that retain the gill structure and air breathing mode at adults, and then you move 1,000 other air breathers. We know from the fossil record, from the developmental processes, that the thing didn't creationists, that just doesn't seem to sink in.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between creationism and intelligent design, or are they the same thing now?
I mean,
right is intelligent design. That yeah, I use the term for the which is a very specialized area, but it's still creationism. The intelligent design movement and older creationists are kind of a pimple on the side issue. There are very few of them involved. But the amount of literature that's put out on the anti-evolution side, the vast majority of it is from the creation aspect. So the only thing that differentiates intelligent design from young Earth creation is they just don't think about the age of the Earth. It's just not.
Yeah. So what are you going to say about that?
Well, I was just going to say that intelligent design, it seems to be creationists that want it to be want creationism to be viewed in a more, I guess, scientific light rather than in the theological light that it actually exists within. because they shift from, you know, a specific, you know, God of Yahweh or the God of the Bible to just a generic intelligent designer or deity that has to design things. And so they try to focus less, I guess, on the theological aspects of creationism, and they try to substantiate their claims with science. But what they end up having to do, and I'm sure RJ has experienced this a lot, is they end up having to either misrepresent or just make up scientific information, or quote unquote scientific information, in order to support their positions. And they end up, I mean, they get called out all the time by, you know, like Jackson Wheat, RJ, and other people. You know, that's the one thing about intelligent design, like responses, is that typically they'll like throw out quote mine things, and you have to do a deep dive on like, where did they get it, you know, what did the person actually say, is this in line with what the person said they said. And so you kind of have to do sort of a deep dive on every single like claim and quote that they give.
Yeah.
Learned a
So
lot
back when I was
to dive the quotes, because you find out what the person actually said and you find out politics. But this is why both all branches of the evolutionism is that they are addicted to quote mining. They addicted to into the theology, whereas mere opinion is irrelevant in the sciences. It doesn't matter what Nobel or law says, it's what evidence do you have. And that are missing most of the data field. That's the flaw, is that the anti-ev in general is only 15% of relevant information, and what they do misrepresenting the source material. So it's
yeah. Back when I was still a believer, I actually, yeah, I was confused a bit, and I actually thought intelligent design was another word for theistic evolution. But then I later learned that was,
that's not a bad perception. That because intelligent design, even though there are some younger creationist designers, Paul Wells, Recovery Institute, they're both young earthers, but they don't talk about that. Intelligent design, brand of intelligent design, where they come into a problem is into the biblical creationists that are still trying to defend creation. That's why the intelligent design can't ever get to do semantics in a way that creationists at least try to, because no way they're going to be able to plow through to ascertain exactly was how many created a created type and variations on that. You won't find any analysis in design or older creation. The Earth creation.
You said this earlier, but argument I always see about design thing is they always try to compare living things to like things like clocks or cars or whatever. You know that. Mm-hmm. Like they try to compare this stuff, and it's like that's not really until like cars can give birth to other cars. You know, I don't think that's really a good comparison.
Well, yeah, so that's another thing that they try to do is they try to do the whole. I believe it started out as like a 747 getting put together by a tornado in a junkyard or something.
Yeah, that dates back to the Navy creation.
Yeah. And so you have a lot of creationists and intelligent design proponents that that try to compare the natural development of certain, or like either organisms or certain non-organic things like mountains or planets or things of that nature. They try to compare them to like man-made things that we like. The explanation is man put that together, or man designed it, and built it and everything like that, but they try to compare that to natural things, and that's called a false analogy fallacy, because you can't, like, those two things aren't analogous. We have natural explanations like evolution, as well as other chemical processes that go into like the different aspects of organisms that you just can't compare to like a 747
Yeah.
or a car or something like
Yeah,
that.
the closest thing I ever seen to that was they talked about the building of bridges or planes. How at first we had a lot of different plane designs or bridge designs, and eventually the ones that failed miserably, or collapsed or crashed, and eventually we got the one we have now. That's the thing I heard on the other side of that.
Yeah, there is of natural selection from a practical time, and they learn about the stress factors of metals and all. But the spectacular example of a bridge that met all of the design of 1938 and failed to take into account what we can do today. Bridge disintegrated in a high in 1941. Since almost everywhere, I think they look much better, frankly. But the ones that have the cables running down the middle of it, instead of one using an arcs. So bridge on changing, and new design keeps changing. However, operates differently because it can have lots of design events going on in the mutation level, and anything that doesn't work well makes you extinct. So it's they know that people can design very sophisticated new proteins to do new things by letting natural selection do the selecting that bypasses the need to consciously design it. It can let the thing, what works will work, and will select for the things that work, and it'll make it better. So natural selection can be applied in actual engineering and bioengineering. I have yet to see anybody try to apply intelligent design principles and get away with anything.
Yeah, the only difference is with actually design stuff, we can actually go inside and change the one thing that's wrong maybe and fix it. Well, if we do that in a real life thing, you kill the person, kill the thing.
Well, and it depends on the kind of elements. One of the things that changed our perspective on this, and both evolutionary scientists and frankly creationists, hitchhiking along the background, the difficulty of it, that really was that this protein, turns out, nope, there are way fewer genes than there are proteins. Same gene being used, a piece of it to make this protein, and reading it backwards produces this protein, and this one modulates with that to make that protein. So which is why we've got like 100,000 proteins that we use, but we only have like about 25 or 30,000 genes. And this is true for an awful lot of organisms. Or if you have an organism that has rampant gene duplication to where you've got lots and lots of versions, that allows modifications to occur, and you still retain the original function while getting a new one. Well, that is not how designer systems work. You don't have an automobile that is trying out a new way to run the buttons on the air conditioner while you're driving the car, which is what would be happening if it were a naturally evolving organism rather than a designed object.
I wonder how cars would speciate.
Oh, yes. And is there a problem when you try to mate a Toyota with a Ford? This is the issues here. And that key issue is the Richard Dawkins nicer points made in his various books. At the moment you have a system that can replicate and have natural variation, you are now in a Darwinian context, whether you like it or not. Probably can't work at all. Inheritance of acquired characteristics is kind of what happens in context where somebody windshield wiper and Ford decides to turns out to be other companies simply copy it and incorporate. That kind of stuff can happen fairly easily in a designer-based intellect format. It is exactly what doesn't happen in a Darwinian system. And so there's a constraint on why things end up the way they do, that is a testament to the fact that organisms are not designed, they're evolved by Darwinian means.
Yeah, I feel like Toyotas and Fords would be a ring species.
Yes, there we go. Well, and that's another matter of ring species are a thing that don't get discussed nearly as much as they should, which is that species are simultaneously vague and squishy and yet surprisingly resolute, and which is why regular biologists have go into conniption fits trying to work out what does it mean to be a species and what does it mean to do speciation, because speciation can take place relating to the nuclear genes, it can relate to the mitochondrial genes, it will relate to geographical distribution, it'll relate to predator-prey relationships acting as a selection pressure. In other words, it's a multilinear, not a monocausism thing.
Yeah, it will relate to things like birds, the bird sounds like, oh, he's not tweeting right. I don't like him anymore. Let's go. This guy tweets much better.
Yeah, and it's ironic that poor old Alfred Wallace could never get on board with sexual selection. He just didn't like that whereas we now know in retrospect, because so much study's been done on it for the last 50 years, that boy, Darwin had nailed that there's natural selection and sexual selection. Both of them can play a part, and sexual selection for female selecting male and vice versa, male attempting to attract the female, all in that dynamic. And that can be viewed experimentally. Poor old Alfred Wallace just couldn't get past that idea. Maybe a sex thing that's thrown on.
Probably.
How much trouble Wallace had with it. Imagine how conservative creation, where you mention sex and you are now off the field. Boy, they're never going to get it.
I listened to this before I think, but I love it when those two things work against each other. Like, I forget where it was. It was like a group of fish where they put in one group in a predator pond and another group in a non-predator pond.
Oh yeah, I think sticklebacks. They've been able to do that experimentally. That you can literally measure the extent of sexual selection. One of his new videos as well. That there's an example. We don't have to guess that this is how it works. We can experimentally verify it.
Yeah. The ones without predators were more colorful and like, look at me, look at me. The ones with predators were like, don't look at me, don't look at me. I'm hiding.
And they can identify which genes were changing that permitted them to do that. The idea that you have, I think one of the things conceptually that distinguishes people in the scientific community from ones in the anti-evolution community is their ability to think of multiple variables all at once. That you have to think in terms of the fact that you have mutations at the nucleotide level, and then you have mutations at the regulatory gene level, and you have mutations that can occur as genes are being swapped back and forth in sexual reproduction, and then you've got the organism as a whole that is interacting with its environment epigenetically and also in terms of its responses that can vary. And you have then a population of those organisms that are all operating, and they are competing for various factors, and that's in an environment and then you have predator-prey relationship sitting on top of constantly moving, and river range. All of those things are happening all at the same time. It means that modeling this kind of stuff is extremely intricate. But if you have a design perspective where you're looking at it like you've got an IKEA shelving system where you have just a very fixed amount of components and any change will mean that you can't make the shelf, they're going to maybe understand IKEA shelves, but they're going to have a terrible job making sense of biological systems.
So John, when you're building something, what do you try to do?
What in regards to what exactly?
Anything. I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, obviously you want to try to, provide the best solution possible that accomplishes the task with the least amount of risk, the least amount of not complicated as possible, because the more complicated you make something, the more likely you are to have like errors crop up and stuff like that. As far as like my own like engineering experience, you have different design You got different design methodologies, but I don't think that that translates all that well to like biological design and stuff like that. I would think that you would want to uh, design something like, as far as like the human body goes. Let's say I would figure that you would want to one particular engineering change that I would probably make, that I would think that a perfect designer would make, would be to make our bodies a bit more repairable, because you have different species in the animal kingdom that can like regrow whole
Yeah.
limbs. Like I know, I believe starfish can regrow whole limbs, and of course lizards, they have that detachable tail as a survival trait. You would think that God would implement something like that for his prized creation, being human beings. But if you lose an arm, you lose an arm.
Well,
It doesn't grow
remember,
back.
human beings were made in God's image, and God does not have a detachable tail. So that explains that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were made in God's image, but also you need to cut the tip of your penis off. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Maybe that's
that's
that.
just God's own little bloody pinky swear right
I guess that
there.
is the
Oh, I
detachable
got a
tail.
comment about the wonderful picture on the back of your wall there. That beautiful bit from the Temple of Dar, or whatever it is in Babylon. That one crops up in New Rocks for their bit, because many creationists insist that is a picture of a dinosaur.
But, speaking of design and stuff, for this, I've heard that I think a lot of our problems we have, because we evolved and stuff, is our back issue. Some people have by standing since we stand up vertically.
Yeah,
I mean,
we've had to adapt to things that can be a little bit awkward, and you can have knee joints that can flip out and discs that can slip and all that, because if generally bipedality is not one of their big items, and that is telling you that it is not something with a great deal of selection value, except in very niche environments. Whereas you look at the ubiquitous bipeds, birds, coming from the enormous number of bipedal dinosaurs that there were. So their layout and structure made it very amenable to do that. Whereas for us mammals coming in, you see bats and pterosaurs would have been the same thing compared to birds. The moment a bat lands on the ground, it shows off the fact that it's a quadruped. It's not walking around on its hind feet.
well, I think us and kangaroos have so long bipedal, where the theropods had a much longer time to
Well, there was
get.
a little itty bitty in the Mezzel Formation in Germany, which is about 50 billion years ago, where you have the first bats known, and that there's this little itty bitty thing, about a little smaller than a rabbit, that is basically your teeter-totter theropod design, with a bipedal, with a long balancing tail, and it probably went along. It could have lived for millions of years, fine and dandy, but it left no long-term descendants. And either that was because of the luck of the draw, or the whole dynamic of the mammal metabolism and the hair structure and the way the birth system and everything, some factor may have entered into it that made that design not all that practical in the long term. And so we don't find that operate. There is a matter about the stability of four-legged animal, that you've got more balance that way. If you're not a fast mover, if you want to look at the fastest running animals, they're cheetahs and the like. They're four-legged, not two-legged. You can get up to a certain level of speed that way. And so now we're going back to the issue of why, now that we know more about the hominid record, we know that bipedality was cropping up quite a lot among Australopithecines and their cousins. And therefore, there was something about it, the way it was easy to go traipsing along on a tree limb, in a way that, and the taillessness that became an advantage. It's still a thing where it's probably a bunch of different families together in one package. Does a designer perspective,
Well, that's still like 6 million years compared to like a few, like the whole Triassic and Jurassic for dinosaurs to get used to it.
Yeah. Well, the dinosaurs had a chance to try out an awful lot of stuff. They too had their limitations, although it may be the case that there were examples that have never been preserved. As far as I know, there are no fully aquatic dinosaurs. You have fully aquatic crocodiles over in their archosaur cousins, fine and dandy mosasaurs. There's a lot of reptilian marine animals that are fully aquatic, but no examples from dinosaurs. Now, is it something about the biological mix of a dinosaur that made it hard to do that, or is it that other reptiles to invade a new niche? That's something that the blind paleontologist Hamish has suggested.
Well, personally, I think if you give it enough time, that the descendants of penguins might be that first aquatic dinosaur. Maybe.
In fact, that's the factor, is that they've been able to invade, and they've been able to produce ridiculously tiny forms. They have limitations. The biggest condors are the and yet managed to make flying forms there. So, of what dynamic constraints are there organisms, and can we measure them and quantify them? Evolutionists just love to try to figure out all of that stuff, and it's an ongoing debate that goes on. In some respects, as we get better and better at modeling and we get more and more genetic information available, some of those nuts will be cracked and we'll have a better sense of what's going on. I'll predict, however, no creationist is going to figure any of this out, because they just go, well, design, and then their brain shuts off.
Okay, ask John this question first, you can answer later. I just like another argument a lot about design is the wing, the half wing argument, whether this is half a wing and stuff, and so it had to be fully designed as a full wing. You hear this argument a lot.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, basically having to, like, you have to evolve everything at once, or all of this one thing at once. But we've actually been able to do experiments like with gene editing and stuff to show how things could have evolved separately. There's also basically just following the evolutionary line back and seeing where different parts developed and how they don't all have to develop at the exact same time. Like, true, if you were to, like, if you wanted to just have a human, you need all of the human parts to be there. But I think that's the one thing that a lot of creationists or intelligent designers don't really understand about it, is that these are changes that have been collected over billions of years, and they can only think in like instants. Like there's they need things to happen instantly, and they can't really fathom like the deep time that's needed for evolution to actually happen, or like how changes build upon one another. They don't seem to be able to understand that.
Yeah, the fossil record, fortunately, has blown to smithereens the half a wing argument, because we now know the line of the evolution of birds. And at no point was there ever need of half a wing. You have dinosaurs with arms that move in various ways, that basically is moving the flight stroke in its natural movement. It develops for insulation. And then now that feather insulation can produce an airfoil. So at all stages, you've got a fully structural arm that is taking on the role of an aerodynamic feature. And you can even have hind wings in the case of the little microraptors, or even membranes plus feathers is the case of that G-Qui critter. We put a catalog of all this stuff in the rocks were there, of all the various feathered theropods in that. So the old argument that you had to have kind of like this stubby proto-wing, that is quite opposite of the facts. The other thing that's interesting is that the two main models of how bird wings developed, which was the cursorial running on the ground approach versus the arboreal jump from a tree approach, Phil Currie recently mentioned that this was actually a false dichotomy that stifled research in this area for decades, because both of those things were happening at once. There's again that monocausism obsession, that there's a single thing going on rather than dynamic forces that can be affecting multiple things at the same time. And now that we know much more about bird wings and bird digits and all of that, the bird digit issue was a really big thing for a while, that the bird digit fingers seem to be different than the ones that you found in dinosaurs. And Alan Fiducia was making a big deal about this. But starting in the late 90s and into the 21st century, they did more genetic research that found out that there had been a frame shift that went on. And so that it just jumped from one digit to another. And it was even tested experimentally to show that that was what was going on. So that's not as popular an argument as it used to be.
Are you talking about that, what's it called, the band thing? Birds are not dinosaurs, or whatever that
Yeah,
called?
yeah, that's the German words. Where they like to talk about all of that. There's some the same thing when we talk about Lagerstätten, that's a German word, and when you see the KT extinction, that's Cretaceous spelled with a K because the German version of it. So there's all these little foreign language blips. The same way as the debate about whether you say Neanderthal or Neanderthal. Well, actually, everybody says Neanderthal, but it's spelled Neanderthal with a TH, because the Germans spell it with a TH and the French leave it out. But it's pronounced the same way.
Another thing I think we cool if it was a designer do is, give the flying creatures their front limbs back, because they don't have them. Their front limbs are their wings. Pterosaurs, birds, and bats.
Oh, this gets into fun stuff with the dragon lore, because dragons are often depicted as quadrupedal animals with extra set of wings. So they're basically a hexapodal vertebrate, which is sorry, never been, never like that. And the creationists that try to turn dinosaurs into dragons and pictures of them in medieval art as somehow living dinosaurs that supposedly were seen by the guy that painted the thing, often forget the fact to count the number of digits, limbs on the thing, and realize, no, they're making this shit up. This is not based on an actual animal.
Well, I think if that's the case, and dinosaurs would be this an clade of insects that do have the extra pair of wings up there.
Yeah. And the same thing with the Pegasus. If you look at a Pegasus, there's a horse with wings on its back. And people can invent those things all over the place. Unfortunately, in addition to the weight to lift ratio that would make it highly improbable for that. Or you look at a dragon like Smaug in Lord of the Rings, or in The Hobbit. My God, no animal is ever going to get off the ground that's that large. And you find out all the time in the way that we can easily depict things like that. But ironically, people have gone back and looked at how dragons have been depicted, and they've realized that the dragon images that people have change with the paleontology. So as you start putting in what is a dinosaur, they start making them look more like so latest paleontology stuff, it's old. They deliberately the first actually added and changed it to more like a bat with the wings up on the front, and so they had to digitally correct that when they put out the DVD of it to make the old footage from the first one to be matched to the latest version. So there's a process in this.
So John, do you have any more arguments against design that you've had to face against people?
Well, so one of the things, going back to the whole the feather deal, or like the wings and stuff like that, we can actually do we've actually done experiments where we've edited, I believe it was crocodile embryos, we done genetic editing on them and have changed just a few genes that ended up turning their scales into these proto feather type structures. And so like a lot of times one of the arguments that I've heard from creationists or intelligent design proponents is something about how feathers are constructed and how that's like unique. It's part of the irreducible complexity
Oh, Michael Denton
type of
has made a
argument.
big deal about that in book
Yeah.
after book. And in fact, in Evolution Slam Dunk, I went into analyzing a lot of the problems with that. And then we alluded to the feather issue and that again in Evolution Slam, or in The Rocks Were There. The thing that we have now is that the two figures that are extremely important in this are Richard Prum and his occasional partner, what his first name is. They've done many years, and they went and worked out what the developmental processes of feather formation was, and very little of that work ever gets cited by Michael Denton. And so they worked out that if you're proceeding from an evolutionary perspective, all of that would have to be consistent with the way feathers are developed. So they worked out a series of proto-feather stages, about 5 different stages that go from a simple filament all the way out to the barb feathers today. It turns out that one of the early stages is evolution. As observed in amber, in the Mesozoic period, we literally the details of it. They realize stages. They eliminate a couple of stages that they have because this one moved in. Oh boy, we have a lot of and things going on with evolution, and this is not discussed by creationists.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I've heard this in a while, but like I said, I don't know if it's been a while or not, or I've been paying attention to it. Is the eye argument still going strong? How the eye is complex, it had to be created? Is that still a thing going now in creationist circles that either of you heard?
Well, I mean, for me, I mean, the eye is kind of like one of those general items that is brought up by people that don't understand evolution. It's kind of one of those. They throw numerous facts, your way to try to obfuscate the topic of the evolution of the eye, try to make it seem like there's no way it could have developed naturally, but any amount of facts that they pile on top of it, it's still just them saying that the eye couldn't naturally have come into existence. But there's that Dawkins clip where he kind of goes through the step-by-step evolution of the eye, and typically whenever that's brought up, I usually try to discuss how we've got versions of every developmental step of the eye currently in the living I guess the living creatures that we have today. There's an example of just about every evolutionary step of the eye.
Yeah. And to work
that's
out the
out
common
there.
ancestry and the common components of it is difficult because eyes were developing 500 million years ago. This was happening during the Cambrian. Lots of different forms are developing visual sensory systems in the late Precambrian and early Cambrian. So the common genetic substrates of that are in forms, some of which don't exist anymore as organisms. Trilobite eyes is another one that still gets trotted out in the anti-evolution literature, but we have no trilobites to look at to find out what their genes were. I would predict if we did, they would not be bringing this up.
Also, if it was a design, I'd rather have this octopus eyes, since apparently they have better eyes.
For certain things, they actually there's again quite a lot of genetic and biological research that's gone into them. It's a trade-off. They don't have the inverted retina the way vertebrates do. They have a different way of processing color information, which has advantages if you're in water, but we are not fully aquatic. And that's another one that Michael Denton seems to have missed the point on this one, where they talks about, well, the inverted retina is actually helpful in certain contexts? Well, yeah, I suppose. I suspect in some ways it's spurred on a lot of genetic and brain development in vertebrates, because they've had to circuit their way around the fact that they've got a bloody blind spot that occurred accidentally. But the argument for design fails, because if the one without the inverted retina works better underwater, why then do vertebrate fish not have that design? Why wouldn't the designer have supplied fish with the superior one without the inverted retina, the octopus style eye, and then terrestrial animals would have the one with the inverted retina? They're hoist on their own petard on this, as they just don't think it through.
So, is there any other body parts of humans, at least, that are badly designed? Either you think?
I mean, I think the entire body is kind of poorly designed. Just from a personal perspective, I mean, my pancreas is broke, and when that breaks, you're in the past, there was no cure for it. There's no cure for it now, obviously, other than I guess maybe they're testing like artificial pancreases, pancreas, whatever. And but in the past, like before they developed insulin that diabetics could give themselves, I mean, you were pretty much kind of shit out of luck. I believe one of the pieces of advice for diabetics was to like drink whiskey, because apparently whiskey or liquor binds to sugars like better than some things. I know drinking a lot of water helps process the sugar out of your system sometimes, depending on how much water you drink. But I mean, that's just like one of those basic things that you would think that a perfect designer would think of a better way to accomplish the task, rather than adding another component to be able to use the energy, through the glucose energy in your veins, to be able to pass those into your muscles. You would think that you would have a better system than needing this hormone that's produced by this one gland in your body, or not gland, but this one organ in your body. And that hormone also can control like weight gain and your ability to like lose weight, like all of this from like a natural chemistry kind of point of view makes sense. But from a perfect designer sort of point of view, I think that you could have definitely developed a better system uh in some kind of fact. Like I'm not going to sit here and try to act like a biologist or anything like that to figure out, well, what would be a better way for humans to burn energy. But what I can say is that the perfect creator of reality, of like that's the smartest being in all of reality, you would think that that would be something that they could mitigate. And I don't have to know what the solution is to know that a perfect designer would not have designed that.
Yeah, one of the examples I like to bring up are the ALUs. I can never remember what the hell the initials referred to, but there's like 10% of our genome are these retrotransposons. There are, I think, 1.5 million of them and counting in the typical human being. And most of them don't do a damn thing. Some of them do something. They've mutated and become functional up in our brain chemistry, which is kind of interesting. And some creationists have called attention to some of that stuff. See, it was designed after all. Well, what about all the other millions, some of them? And the fact that most of the time when they do mutate to form a start codon to instruct the genetic system to pay attention to them, they cause a mess. They're popping up in the middle of proteins and causing them to misfold and all that. So if they were designed, and could they have got into our genome if they weren't designed according to the designer model, then there's all these little ticking time bombs lurking around in there. That's kind of creepy, which is one of the reasons why, boy, try to get a creationist to talk about ALUs and it's cricket time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, do designers have to modify things piece by piece, like evolution, like natural
To
selection
some
does?
extent, most of the
Or
time they
before
just
talking
shut up
about?
about it. So nothing is more amusing than reading very old creationist gee whiz posts and trying to find out, have they mentioned anything about them since? I pop into that every once in a while because CMI will trot out something where an article from 1995 by Carl Wieland, and you're going, wow, has no work been done on that in the decades since? And then I would make it an episode of my show going into the discussion of, yeah, there's been a lot of work on this, but nothing by creationists apparently. But about the main areas where creationism is actually involved, one of them is that they've accepted plate tectonics with a vengeance. So they have continents moving around lickety split like a funhouse ride to get literally in. If you look at the Creation Museum, they're talking about Rodinia being the pre-flood continent and turning into Pangea sometime during or after the flood, and then generating our present continental system after the flood. That's a lot of plate tectonic movements going on. And spoiler alert, there were continents previous to Rodinia, so they're going to have to move the goalposts. The other area relates to their more or less throw speciation. And yet you find tons of people, even creationists, have called attention to the fact that so many creationists confuse a kind with species. So when they speak about there's been no speciation, what they mean, if they want to translate it accurately, is that there's been no new kinds made. But even that doesn't apply, because isn't the switch from capsids into the mammal and into us clearly an thing?
Yeah, what got me thinking away from theistic evolution, if it was true and God existed, it would be like, if that's true, wouldn't that mean that God bred humans like we breed chihuahuas? Like we're pretty much humans are pretty much the chihuahuas of the primate family.
Well, I think, did you breed chihuahuas by having like the adults breed with the children? I thought that
Not being a
that's
dog
the way
breeder,
that you breed chihuahua.
I'll pass on that bit. The main problem for all of the creationist worldview here, and Nathaniel Jensen and Jeffrey Tompkins, who are trying to ram genetics and population distributions into the post-Babel, post-flood scenario, is that so much of their viewpoint is resting on a doctrine that only involves a new. They only knew people that were right next door. Vision of things were what Egypt over there, and then the Assyrians over here, and anything. People that were living in Norway, did they know were living in an extremely worldview that then map that onto the entire population of the planet. Get into how this stuff worked. Even Rob Carter, the younger creationist, has the new book Trace doesn't read the Americas very well. So that Y chromosome argument and
Hmm.
One of the arguments from creationists that I found that's not it's not really evolution based is and I believe that even AIG has like a blog article on their website that's like, this is a bad argument. But I've seen it from like CMI, I think, and that's the moon dust issue. Like they claim that there's too much moon dust. Huh?
one had a big state remorse apology in the 19th. Everybody that copied that put it up, but it's almost extinct today. Major leaguers realize, it's people reading old Kirks or old creationist web posts, because that stuff is still up for them to copy. It still pops up very proliferally, but it's one that if
Okay, let me bring us back. Yeah, talking about how life has to modify stuff that we have to get the work, and we don't need to do that. Designers don't need to modify stuff, or do they?
the principle wrong with that kind of thing. The one I love about, if God would design everything, they could have done it. That would have been an absolute dead giveaway design, and that for every time DNA code, that if codon assignments to amino acids are actually probably arbitrary, but if they were and were purely designed, there's more than 1,500 aboard the Ark in the Ark Encounter model that it would have had its own proprietary DNA. You would have still been able to do things because they would manufacture the same protein and that, except they would be using different DNA codes to code for it inside. But that ain't what we find.
Well, so for me, it depends on what kind of designer you're talking about, because as far as like human designs, I totally expect humans to not get a design correct or to design imperfect things, because we're not claiming to be perfect. We're not claiming to have perfect knowledge of things. What I don't expect is the perfect being of all reality that is has all of the knowledge um that this perfect being would have, and I don't think that perfect being should produce designs that have to be reworked. I would think that perfect being would be able to put put out like perfect designs. So as far as like, do I expect designs to have like different development, do I expect them to get better over time in an evolutionary way? Yes, I do. If we're talking about human like designers, human engineers, non-perfect designers. But if we're talking about perfect designers, I would think that you wouldn't have that.
To get right the first time.
I didn't get a chance to say bye to RJ. I'll have to send him a DM or something telling him bye. But yeah.
Have you ever had to fix anything wrong? Have you ever designed anything that you had to fix? Was it hard or easy
Yeah,
to fix
I mean,
something?
so I've got an app out there called Crestus, and I inherited that, and it was the app that's still on Apple iTunes is a poor design, and I redesigned it, and I've already got the redesign up on Google Play, but it's a lot harder to publish things on Apple iTunes. But I had to go in and I had to redesign that system, and I still have to like rethink and redesign things on at my normal job, which is an engineer, and figuring out what's the best way to design something is often a process that you just come about through trial and error. And sometimes you can gain knowledge through other people that have experienced the exact same things. Learning from other people's experience is a pretty big aspect of like your engineering career. But I expect things to grow and evolve over time. I expect things to get more complex over time, but it depends on how you manage like your system as to whether or not that complexity is manageable. and having a manageable complexity, I think, is a feat in itself. And so that's why I said earlier that like sometimes complexity is inescapable. Like
Yeah.
there's you can't escape the need to have complexity, but it's all about being able to manage the complexity. Is have you designed your system to easily, handle the complexity of the system? Is a pretty big aspect of trying to design something that's manageable.
Of course, you don't have to worry about any of your inventions having kids of their own and with a stray mutation in it.
I'm
So
sorry, can you repeat that?
I says, of course, you don't have to worry about anything that you make start having kids and like to have a stray mutation and this thing all of a sudden.
Well, no. So I don't work in artificial intelligence. The things that I work on are pretty straightforward and mechanic. Like by that I mean I write the code and the computer does what my code says to do. Um, and that's where it stops. Like it doesn't produce anything, or it doesn't try to create anything, which I think that in the future AI would be able to do. But right now, no. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't produce, it doesn't change, it doesn't grow.
Yeah. Yeah. No computers having kids, no birds having kids, no inbreeding cars.
Yeah. Yeah. No cars are being bred.
Ugh, brain dying. Ugh.
You all right?
Yeah, takes me thinking of something, brain not working. Another, I don't know if it's a bad design or just me.
No. I would definitely blame the designer if he exists.
So, so you're talking about engineering locations. That's connection. Did we ever talk about how how they always compare stuff to living things?
Oh yeah, we compared that earlier. I brought up the 747 being
Uh,
put together in a junkyard through a tornado. But I mean, as far as arguments that intelligent designers and creationists use, um, I mean, they'll pull out the entire gambit on you as far as all that goes. One thing that I don't think we talked about yet was how they try to go after like proto human, proto hominid, like proto Homo sapien species, like Australopithecus, or other organisms like that. And they try to make it out to be like, oh well, they're more ape than human. And it's like, they're different species, but we're still apes. Like they that's one thing that they don't get, is that human beings are apes.
yeah.
We're
Oh
part
yeah.
of the great ape family, and they don't want to admit that, because what that means is that we're just another animal species on this
Yeah.
planet, and they want to think of ourselves as special and different when we're really not.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the thing. That reminds me. If we were as common designer, why did the designer create us to look so much like the other primates?
Well, obviously, ID proponents would tell you that, well, God had a common design and he just copy pasted and changed a few things for us. And, that's how they get around like chromosome 2 in the great ape family, because that's a pretty big piece of evidence that we share an ancestor with the other great apes. Um, so, I mean, obviously, I would think that if God had designed stuff, then he wouldn't need to make this species nearly similar to that species, but just changing things on a genetic level, because that's what we're talking about, are like small changes on a genetic level for a lot of species out there. And also, I feel like a lot of people, a lot of ID proponents and creationists, they can't explain the fact that speciation is still happening today. Of course, they take speciation in more of a macro, I guess, level of speciation, meaning that they expect a dog to give birth to like a wholly different animal. I typically say a dog gives birth to a cat, is what they're expecting. Like they're expecting the lineage of these animals to like jump clades. They expect them to be morphologically different from birth. And that's just ignorance on how evolution works. Now, of course, I'm not I'm not an evolutionary biologist or anything. RJ was the expert in this stream, but
Yeah.
from an engineering perspective, with the small changes that happen in designs in general over time, the small changes that we see in like morphology and body plans and all that through the fossil record, it seems to it makes sense in a gradual change that results from natural selection pressures, rather than a designer that's like tweaking his design a little bit to make it better or something like that. Especially considering that these quote unquote designs are good designs for the environment that they exist within, and then as soon as they change environments, they're not all that well designed anymore. So even this whole concept of being perfectly designed or being designed in the first place is very subjective to wherever the organism lives. Um, so I mean, it kind of casts some doubt on the whole designer aspect when you can take a species from one environment, put it in another environment, like a whole group of organisms, and you can literally see them change. We've actually got um, an experiment you can find on YouTube where they take bacteria, and you can see the bacteria like as the generations procreate, throughout the experiment, they change to um, survive in their environment. And by the time that it gets out to like the third or fourth bands from the very center of the sample, um, they've changed enough where this adaptation has grown to where they're different from the original organisms that started. Now, creationists will take a look at that and be like, well, they didn't change kind. And it's like, well, what do you mean by kind at that point? And you can go down that rabbit hole. But the fundamental changes in that one organism can survive in this environment and the other one can't, I feel is a stark difference in their genetic code, as well as, just how these organisms work in general. And that itself is not explained by the designer argument. And I think that that's one thing that creationists will never be able to answer.
Two things that I thought of when you're talking is, one, we kind of do have a cat dog thing almost. I was thinking about, because for the longest, look at I noticed recently, but hyenas are are more closely on the cat side of the family tree, but they look a lot like dogs.
I mean, I don't know, like, taxonomically,
Yeah,
because then
true,
might
true.
know.
But I was thinking that like the cats giving birth to dogs or dogs giving birth to cats. I'm like, yeah. For the longest time, I thought hyenas were on the dog side because they look like dogs, but no, they're cats. So not the cats
Yeah,
in
the
general.
the hyenas' closest relatives are actually mongooses and civets.
Oh,
So they're closely related to mongoose.
hmm. I thought they
I
were
don't
what,
know if that's how you would say that, but
maybe. Also, the another thing, but we talked about the wing, but I thought the thing is is designed, but not designed of fish whales and ichthyosaurs. Uh,
Yeah.
so they're designed commonly, but their parts are totally different.
Yeah. I'm pretty weak in the taxonomy
Uh,
discussion. I did not do well in AP biology for that particular part.
what you mean you don't know all the answers for everything?
I know that's proof that I'm just a dipshit.
That's the thing I see creationists do a lot is they change the subject of stuff, like they're arguing something and they're like arguing evolution. They start talking about uh, the Big Bang. I'm like, or or geology, or I'm like, what's that do with anything? Or vice versa.
Well, so their whole intent is to confuse you into just not pushing back anymore, and that's I feel like that's what the intent of that particular tactic is to just pretty much throw enough stuff at you to where you can't answer it all, and they get the satisfaction of being like, oh well, I guess I'm right then. It kind of goes back to this whole idea that unless you can explain every single aspect, then the default answer is God did it. And even if you don't know like how something developed or why something developed the way that it did, that doesn't automatically mean that the most likely answer is God. The most likely answer is still a natural explanation. It's just that either we don't know or you don't know what the explanation is, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah,
Some creationists out there have a problem with answering it with, well, I don't know the answer to that, but I feel like it's the more honest answer, because if
yeah,
you don't know, I mean, I wouldn't want someone to just pull something out of their ass and tell me about it. I would
yeah.
want them to at least be honest enough to be like, well, I don't know about that. And
And,
then,
and that's why we have different stuff to study that. We can't study everything all the time. That's why we have engineers or biologists or space researchers or chemistry people, because they focus on one thing. Other
yeah,
people focus on their thing.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, anything else you want to talk about?
I mean, we pretty much run a full gambit on the creationist and intelligent design sort of discussion there. So, I
All right.
mean, I don't have anything to bring up.
All right. Anybody still in chat want to ask any questions while we have GE here? So as we're waiting for anything coming up on your channel, you want to plug?
Well, on Monday, this coming Monday, I've got a video going up where I discuss the mystery religion origins of Christianity, and how mystery religions affected Judaism to bring about Christianity. And then later on in the week, I've got a response to Bill Craig about the resurrection that I'll be putting up. I still have to edit that, so I've got that in my queue waiting for me to edit it. And then just throughout the week I'm working on I've got clips on the main channel to go up, and then I've got to work on getting some shorts ready to premiere this week. And I've always got I try to make shorts content for the main channel, which is the way that I've been doing the shorts for the main channel is I've been trying to focus on new content for the main channel. So I'll take like a short that's already been produced, by a religious person or somebody making an argument either for God or against evolution or against atheism, and I'll do sort of like a mini response video to it, and that seems to do fairly decently.
Cool.
So
Yeah, yeah. I need to start doing shorts, but I can't find a good 1 minute clip of something that I have, because I'm a rambler.
I'm somewhat rambly too, so I understand that plight. But other than all that, I mean, it's just a normal week for me.
Right.
Although I don't think they'll be doing a Friday night stream this next week because I'll actually be out of town on the weekend. But other than that, it's just a pretty normal week.
All right, cool. Yeah, next week for me and my guests will be talking about our Constitution of the United States and why it's still relevant after 200 years.
Yeah, that's cool.
Right. Well, if your wife's in chat, happy Mother's Day to her tomorrow. And you want to say your ending phrase on your show? You say on your show?
Oh, sure. Um, are you talking about just? I normally just end it with don't forget to stand up and use your voice, and then bye, heathens.
Yeah, that's it. And as I always say, never stop learning. Enjoy the randomness. We'll see you next time.